Welcome everyone to the start of the virtual GSE application development track. Today I'm so pleased to have Elliot Jolly, who is going to talk about automation and optimization, or automate and optimize using Zowe Conformant REST APIs. So if you've got any questions, we're going to take them at the end, please. Post them in the chat. Elliot will be happy to answer them. And I'm going to hand over to Elliot. So off you go.
Great. Thanks so much, Stuart. Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for taking some time to join me for this session. So as Stuart said, my name's Elliot Jolly. I'm a product manager at the Broadcom Mainframe R&D Center in Prague. And I'm mostly focused on sort of modernizing the way we work with the mainframe. So over the years, I've been heavily invested in improving the maintenance experience for on ZOS. But more recently, I've been part of the Zowe open source software framework. For me, that means working with API producers to help them build APIs that are optimized for a Zowe environment, but also working with the consumers, those API consumers, to help them discover the APIs, use them, and manage them as well. Okay, so let's get cracking. So today I'm going to talk sort of all things mainframe API. I'll start by looking at different categories of APIs available in a mainframe environment. We'll take a look at the two distinct groups of developers involved in providing and consuming these APIs. And also, we'll learn the role that Zowe plays within this ecosystem, both as an enabler and accelerator for modernization for mainframe APIs. And then what I'll do is I'll finish with a few examples of how these APIs are being used in production environments today. So just right at the top, let's just kick it off with a very brief definition of an API. So it stands for Application Programming Interface. It's two programs communicating with each other over an agreed upon protocol. So in the context of this session, for mainframe APIs, we're talking about web APIs on mainframe. So this is still two programs communicating, but they're communicating over the network or the internet. So the two programs don't need to be adjacent on the same machine, or they don't even need to be written, in the same language. Now, within web APIs, there are a few standard protocols such as REST or SOAP. Ultimately, the calls are made, with HTTP requests. So my focus today will be on REST APIs available on the mainframe. So why APIs? Why is it important? Obviously, for all of us, working in mainframe sites, there's a ton of history and development time, processes, security policies, workload, fine-tuning on the mainframe, and that's the result of many years worth of investment. But what we see is along the way, new development methodologies or processes come along, new tooling comes along, CI/CD tools, vulnerability scanning services, monitoring systems, ticketing systems, different automation efforts, et cetera, and not all of these are directly related to the mainframe, but you can often integrate them, with the mainframe, and thereby realize the value that they offer, and that's where REST APIs come in. So REST APIs, as I state here, they're a sort of universal way of tying things together, and they can be used and reused in lots of new and interesting ways. And hopefully, ultimately, they help solve some of the problems that you might be facing as an IT organization. So so now that we have a definition of APIs and why we might want to use them, what we can do is look at two broad categories of APIs available in a mainframe environment. So firstly, business APIs. So these offer a service to your organization's end users. So another way of saying that is that they're used to provide business data to end users. So yeah, it might be via a mobile application or or a website. Second category, infrastructure. So infrastructure APIs, so this is for tools that your organization uses internally to automate and run your business. So infrastructure APIs are used by administrators to manage and administer core systems. So I feel that it's often instructive to distinguish between the two, between business and infrastructure, because quite often they're used by different groups in a mainframe site for different purposes, and they're often managed by different solutions. So now let's go into a bit more detail on each category. So we know that infrastructure APIs are used by development or operations teams to access and automate internal processes. So here, sort of middle top is a very short example of that. So I'm the owner of a batch job. I want to consume in this case, the CA7 REST API to directly react to incidents and make configuration changes. So the API is replacing a manual process that existed beforehand, and we'll talk a bit more about that use case later on. We also know that business APIs are used to provide business data to end users, as we said earlier. So again, here's an example that's going to be familiar to 99.9% of us, I think. So a large bank allows their debit credit card customers to make payments via a Google or Apple payment application. Now the third column over on the right shows a selection of API management solutions that organizations are using to manage these APIs. So on the business side, organizations with, let's say, medium to high maturity in terms of consuming mainframe and distributed APIs in production will often have a management solution in place like the ones indicated here. This is just two examples. There are a number of them available. For infrastructure APIs, within the Zowe community, and certainly here at Broadcom, we recommend the Zowe API mediation layer as a mediator to manage ZOS services used by teams for DevOps and IT automation. So we've seen an increasing amount of interest in the mediation layer as time has gone on, as organizations have begun to explore and consume particularly infrastructure APIs. So the mediation layer is a key component of Zowe, which is an open source framework for the mainframe. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on. So let's have a look a little bit at sort of two key stakeholders, fairly high level. I mentioned these in my introduction earlier on. So we can look at these from a Zowe perspective. So on the one hand, we have API producers, And on the other hand, we have API consumers. So starting with API producers, again, in a Zowe context. So these are folks that build, expose, and operate APIs. So I just, I talked about earlier about Zowe, open source framework. It has many contributions from different vendors, and so to ensure that we have consistency across the APIs that are produced, we have a set of conformance criteria. Much of this centers around compatibility with a single access point to mainframe APIs, which is the API mediation layer. So that refers to that first bullet point. A Zowe conformance program for the mediation layer offers a framework for creating standard and secure APIs. So the mediation layer is our recommended solution for infrastructure APIs that I talked about earlier. And we recommend that API producers of mainframe infrastructure APIs optimize their APIs to run through the mediation layer. So this is all certified via a conformance program, as I mentioned earlier, and this details, the set of building codes or standards describing how the API should be built. So the other group of the two groups is the API consumers. So they're looking to consume APIs to build or optimize internal applications within their organization. So you're a vendor like Broadcom or IBM, you're building out a catalog of Zowe conformant APIs for their solutions. And by the way, there are other vendors are active in this space as well. It's just an example. Customers of these vendor solutions can consume the APIs that they're producing to modernize and automate their own internal applications. So what I'll do later is I'll go through a few use cases to give you some real sort of real world examples of how that's being done. Also, it's worth noting that we as vendors also use the APIs that we're producing, the Zowe conformant APIs, as part of our own solutions. So for example, on the Broadcom side, we have a number of products that actually use these APIs as part of their solution offering. Bridge for Git would be one example. So we've looked at what mainframe APIs are. We've looked at stakeholders, but how do we learn, what APIs are actually available out there? Or indeed, if you have a particular use case in mind, is there, as a potential API consumer, is there an API out there to support the use case that I'm thinking about? So on the zowe.org website, you can see a complete list of Zowe conformant APIs. And hopefully in time, all mainframe APIs would be conformant. So that would be, a single place to see what's available. But if you jump to the bottom right of this slide, you could always go to the vendor solution documentation, where typically the API offering would be described. You've always got search engine as well, bottom left. So that's that, you always have that option, and sort of anecdotally, I know that a lot of developers will go there first to find the information that they need. And then, lastly, in that sort of upper right corner there, Zowe API catalog. So if you set up and configure the mediation layer, and you onboard Zowe conformant services, then you can get a real-time view of what APIs are available and active at your site for immediate use through the Zowe API catalog. And I'll touch on this again in very shortly. So let's take a closer look at the role that Zowe plays as an enabler for automating, optimizing using mainframe APIs. So APIs are really the bedrock of Zowe. As I mentioned earlier, the Zowe ecosystem offers a growing number of infrastructure APIs from, again, multiple vendors that provide access to mainframe resources. So Zowe has a conformance program that I touched on earlier. Again, the aim here is to give users the confidence that when they use a product, app, or distribution that leverages Zowe, they can expect a high level of common functionality, interoperability, and hopefully a better user experience as a result. So for example, when an API producer submits an API for Zowe Conformance, they need to fulfill certain criteria around, security, documentation, and other factors. Again, all as a means of sort of promoting standardization across these APIs. So I've talked a little bit about the mediation layer here and there. So let's just spend a little bit of time just digging in on this core component of Zowe. So APIs that allow CLIs or other client applications to access infrastructure services on the mainframe. That's really the heart of Zowe. And the API mediation layer's role is to manage those services, originating from ZOS. So I found a good way to illustrate this is if you take, for example, Kubernetes or AWS, you'll see that they're tightly coupled with a mediation layer to manage the APIs that they offer for admin or operational purposes. So you can think about the Zowe API mediation layer in the same way, in the sense that it's intended to provide access, secure access to ZOS services used by teams, again for DevOps and IT automation. So why do we recommend the mediation layer? So let's have spend a bit of time looking at this particular visual that we have on the screen here. So on at the top end of the slide, you see three typical personas or roles that might be interested in Zowe extensions, whether that be a CLI plugin or a particular service. So you'll see them in DevOps areas, application development, and you'll see typically system administrators also interested. So you've got that sort of client side at the top there. And then you've got the middleware, which is the mediation layer that has a number of benefits, which I'll go into shortly. And then you've got the on the southbound edge there of the mediation layer, you've then got the different services that are available via the mediation layer. So that there are two kind of broad categories, if you like, there. So there are the Zowe Conformant APIs that are provided mostly by vendors, that are extensions of their existing solutions, oftentimes. And then, on the right hand side, you've got internally developed infrastructure APIs. So these are homegrown APIs within a mainframe site, and these can also be onboarded to the mediation layer, managed by the mediation layer. So just in terms of some of the sort of high level broad benefits, single point of access to all of the APIs there on the at the bottom of the slide. So the mediation layer uses only one port, so that minimizes, it's more secure. It minimizes the attack surface on ZOS, and you're on the client side, the roles there at the top, they only need to know the one port. They don't need to be remembering and accessing multiple ports to get to the services on the other side of the mediation layer. So following from that is single sign-on. So what these API users at the top end, they log in once, and they get a token which they can then use to access all of the onboarded APIs that are behind the mediation layer. So obviously this provides much better user experience and better performance, actually, as opposed to a scenario where these folks at the top would need to be authenticating into each and every service. They don't need to do that because they're going through the mediation layer, and they get a token which gives them single sign-on to to all of the services onboarded to the mediation layer. Security is a big part of the mediation layer. So it provides multiple methods which clients can use to authenticate. So obviously basic authentication, but then if you wanted to go beyond that, there's the tokens that I just mentioned, and and certificates as well. And then it also includes an API catalog, which I'll go into in just a second. So that's kind of the API reference documentation, if you like, for all those APIs onboarded to the mediation layer. And I'll talk about that in just a second. So the mediation layer, it's not just geared towards exploiting the available Zowe conformant APIs that are built by Broadcom, IBM, other vendors, but it can also be used to mediate your own internally developed infrastructure APIs. So these can be onboarded to the mediation layer. There's a special wizard that's it's part of the API catalog that facilitates that. You don't need to make any code changes to those APIs whatsoever. And the benefit of that is that they can then be seen and documented alongside all the other vendor produced Zowe conformant APIs inside of the API catalog. So it's kind of a way, as a mainframe site, if you're looking for a home, for all of those APIs you've developed over time, if you want to sort of foster greater awareness, collaboration, maybe even innovation around those homegrown APIs, then sort of capturing them as part of the API catalog is certainly a good way to achieve those goals. Okay, so just to talk a little bit about the API catalog, because it's an important part of the mediation layer. So I think if we take this from the perspective of an API consumer, so once you have Zowe up and running, you've onboarded the APIs, so you can access the API catalog to see what APIs are actually available. So as you're looking at this visual, each of these tiles represents a unique service. And if you click one of those tiles, you then get into more details on that particular service. So Swagger documentation, you're able to, try out the API. There are code snippets there to sort of facilitate the adoption of that API, etc. So all of the kind of things that you'd expect from a sort of a modern API reference portal. So it gives you, a single view of all the available APIs at your site, all those APIs that have been onboarded to the mediation layer. So this screenshot, it shows the services that are available for use in my particular environment, and these are really what's actually out there, what's running, and what I could conceivably begin to use immediately if I wanted to. Okay, we have a little GIF here that's rushing through the API catalog to give you a flavor of what that looks like. So once you've authenticated, you will then click on a particular service that you're interested. Those are the tiles that I talked about. So this is then the detail page here of a particular service. You will go down, you can check all the endpoints, click on a particular endpoint. As I mentioned earlier, you can actually try out that actual endpoint just to see what kind of responses you would get. So it gives you a really good flavor of the APIs that are actually running in your environment. I'll just let that run through one more time. We also have code snippets as of Zowe 2.3. They're also part of the catalog. So if you're an API consumer, you can quickly try out the actual real world API code. If it works for you, you can grab it in your preferred language and then use it in your own code base. Okay, so let's move on. So I'm sure that many of you, if you're familiar with Zowe, you'll know about the Zowe Explorer and Zowe CLI. So this is just kind of to illustrate that APIs have another important role within Zowe, in the sense that they actually power a number of Zowe clients, such as the CLI and the CLI on the left and Explorer on the right. So the CLI, it's a utility that calls mainframe infrastructure REST APIs. The CLI provides its core set of commands for working with data sets, USS, JES, as well as issuing TSO console commands. It has an ecosystem of plugins that allows you to automate actions on systems, on different systems such as IBM DB2, Kix, etc. And all of this is powered by APIs. And then Zowe Explorer, it's a very popular VS Code extension, and again similar in the sense that it lets you interact with the mainframe, data sets, jobs, etc. Again, all enabled by APIs. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of my session today. I did want to finish by giving you a few examples of how these APIs are used in production environments. So the examples I'm going to give you, they're all Broadcom Zowe Conformant APIs. These are the use cases that I'm most familiar with, but obviously other vendors will have similar use cases that leverage their own solutions. So this particular use case shows how Broadcom's sysview for DB2 solution in tandem with Grafana provides performance dashboards, for DB2. So let's go through and see how this would work. So on the mainframe side, which is the bigger box on the right hand side, so we have you can see the three sysview for DB2 data collectors, and these provide DB2 metrics to the REST API, which we call the CA-DBM data service. So this is the REST API server that then feeds that performance data to the outside world. So of course, this REST API is Zowe Conformant. So we'd recommend onboarding that to the mediation layer to take advantage of some of the benefits that I talked about earlier in terms of security and single sign-on. So then on the open source side, which is the sort of the smaller box on the left hand side, you've then got Prometheus that retrieves and stores these DB2 metrics, and then you've got Grafana that visualizes the collected DB2 statistics. So in this particular use case, thanks to the Zowe Conformant REST API, database teams have at their disposal a whole set of monitoring capabilities that collect performance data in real time. They keep a history, and they also support offloading these statistics into a warehouse database if you wanted to do so. So this kind of dashboard use case is quite a common one. In this case, it's for DB2 performance data, but it can be these kind of dashboards are used across a whole range of use cases, not just DB2. So the next use case involves the Zowe Conformant workload automation CA7 REST API. So if you look at this from the perspective of the batch job owner, so before the API was adopted, the batch job owner in this particular organization had to go through an operator who's in the bottom left of the screen whenever something happened to their batch job. So this was a manual process. It involved some back and forth between the job owner and the operator, usually involving some kind of a ticketing system. So then if you look at this scenario with the CA7 REST API in place, the batch job owner is able to directly react to incidents, make configuration changes without the need to actually go through the operator. So typically you could use this to for the batch job owner to to automatically resolve and restart hanging jobs, for example. And some organizations take this further and build dashboards around this, fed by these APIs, so that they can actually monitor job status, in particular those critical jobs that run their business. So there's a lot that can be done with these APIs to kind of optimize and automate batch jobs. So the third and final use case that I wanted to illustrate today is around a product called JCL Check. So this is a utility that validates the accuracy of JCLs. It helps identify errors like security violations or missing data sets that might cause jobs to actually fail. So by validating the JCL, identifying problems, it provides users with advanced warnings so that you can take actual corrective actions. before the job is actually executed into production. So, it's this fantastic utility, and so, typically this manual process around using this utility is you would invoke the JCL check utility to enforce whatever JCL standards that you have for your mainframe site. So it would run through the job, make sure that everything is as it should be, and then that job would then be promoted to production. Again, all of this is done manually, but the JCL check team actually produced a Zowe Conformant REST API so that this manual process can actually be automated. So here's again a sort of very high level example of how you might do that. So you would start, this goes from sort of top left. So you would start by sourcing some JCL in Git on or off Z. Once it's sourced in Git from your editor, like for example VS Code, you could then push to an on-premises GitHub or some other hosted repository. GitHub then has the ability to trigger other configured services, and in this case we're going to be talking about a continuous integration service like Jenkins. So Jenkins could then run a pipeline which you define. It's just a series of steps that it would run through, one of which would be to invoke the JCL check REST API to verify if the changed or newly created JCL meets your site standards. And then if everything is okay, the JCL could then be deployed as part of that pipeline to production. So you can see how I described the manual process earlier, and you can see how we've moved from a manual process to an automated process involving a Jenkins orchestrated CI/CD pipeline. That as one of its steps calls the JCL check REST API and kind of automates that standards enforcement and automates it then allows the whole automation of moving that job, deploying that job into production. So those are just three examples, three use cases. There are a ton of use cases out there, and what's enabling these use cases? Well, what you see here, on the screen. So there are a growing number of Zowe extensions, and so if you use any of these particular solutions within your mainframe site, then chances are there'll be a REST API that you can use. There might be a CLI plugin, and all of this is helping you to automate some of those manual processes that might have existed for for decades within your mainframe site. So that's it. I'm going to wrap up now. I hope that what I've taken you through is just a taster, but I hope it's going to inspire you to go out and experiment with some of the many Zowe extensions out there today. Yeah, so I'm gonna finish right there, and thank you for your time. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those now.
Thank you so much, Elliot. There are no questions at the moment, but I'll give the participants the opportunity to type away. The session is going to be recorded, and for GSE members will be put onto Vimeo behind a GSE link for the future. Elliot, I guess you're on social media and things if people want to reach out to you on LinkedIn if they've got anything.
Yeah, LinkedIn under my name is probably the best place to reach me. Yeah, absolutely. I welcome any questions, any experiences you've had with Zowe. I'm all ears.
I think the only thing you'd missed out was award-winning Zowe, isn't it? Recently in the DevOps Doesn't Cry.
Yes, you're right. That's an omission. I should include that in this session going forward. Yeah, award-winning indeed. I think for the second year running, Stuart, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow. So it's getting recognition. So that's fantastic.
It is. Okay,
well, we finished a little bit early. Brilliant kickoff to the event, Elliot. We have the in-person one scheduled for November again. And I'm sure there'll be some fabulous Zowe content for those people that can make it to there. So in the meantime, thank you, everyone. I will end the session now. Brilliant job, Elliot. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.